That year, when our relationship was at its worst, David cheated on me with a college student. The girl photoshopped intimate photos of me with other men and sent them to provoke me. I went straight to her school, grabbed her by the hair, and beat her in the street. The crowd grew larger and larger. No one noticed an out-of-control car hurtling directly towards us. In that critical moment, David shoved Addison aside, leaving me to collapse in a pool of blood. As the agonizing pain spread through my body, I could no longer deceive myself. David, who once defied his family for me and promised to never leave my side, he truly had fallen for someone else. 10 years of love, now just bitter strangers. Perhaps I should have let go much earlier, instead of tormenting each other until we became utterly detestable. That was my last thought before losing consciousness. After surgery, I lay in the hospital for a week. The ward door opened, and my eyes automatically went to it. It was my son, Stockton. Mom. Stockton was only 7, but his small face held a maturity beyond his years. He called my name, his lips pressed thin, then handed me a signed divorce agreement. This is what I had a lawyer draft for you. The terms are most favorable to you. When I gave it to Dad, Addison had just twisted her ankle. He was too worried to even glance at it and signed it immediately. While Dad still feels guilty, you can get more from the divorce. Sign it, Mom. Stop acting out. A bitter taste rose in my heart, but I had no strength to retort. I got together with David when I was 17. My biological father was in prison for murder, and my stepfather was a gambling addict. That troubled upbringing meant David's mother, Eleanor Smith, adamantly refused to accept me. To be with me, David endured severe physical punishment from his family. He broke ties with his family and lived with me in a cramped small rental apartment, promising me a better life. And he truly delivered. The once arrogant, wealthy heir delivered food, worked as a salesman, and took on every odd job for me. To surprise me on my birthday, he even secretly worked hauling cement at a construction site after classes in college, leaving him with a permanent shoulder injury. When Stockton was 3, our careers began to take off. Eleanor Smith, unable to resist David, finally let us come home. After enduring such difficult times, David's heart changed. When I discovered his affair with Addison, I was in a daze for an entire day. Anger, fear, disgust, pain, all these emotions intertwined in my heart, intensifying both love and hate. I started creating endless drama. When David arranged huge fireworks for her, I went to her university and publicly called her out for her shamelessness, for breaking up a family. When David gave her credit for a project I had worked tirelessly on to bolster her resume, I denounced them as a disgusting pair in a meeting, a rotten pot with a rotten lid. When David bought her top-tier luxury jewelry and dresses, I cut up the dresses and called the police, demanding she return the gifts. The more I created a scene, the more David sympathized with her, and the more he felt compelled to compensate her many times over. The next time I publicly humiliated Addison, David rushed over to support her. He lit a cigarette, his eyes so cold they seemed devoid of emotion, and asked me, "Are you done making a scene?" I told you, Addison is just a bit childish. No matter what, she won't shake your position. You are my only wife. What more do you have to be unsatisfied about? Back then, I thought I had to cling to this marriage, no matter how rotten, to make Addison an invisible mistress forever. But now, I just felt so tired. Seeing that I hadn't signed, Stockton spoke again. "Mom, Addison is a better fit for Dad than you are. They look more like a family." As if to confirm his words, he pulled out his phone and opened Addison's Twitter, handing it to me. Addison's Twitter was very active, filled with pictures of her happiness every day. There were gifts from David, photos of them together, and sweet moments from their vacations. The latest post had just been updated. In the live photo, David had his sleeves rolled up, applying medicine to her. His usually defiant eyes were now incredibly gentle. In the background, I could hear his voice, full of doting affection, saying, "Of course I'll be by your side forever." The caption read, "With you, I don't have to grow up." After the car accident, the rescue team arrived quickly. David shielded Addison and she only got a scratch. Even so, he was incredibly distressed, mobilizing all the resources of a private hospital for her to rest and recover. Meanwhile, during my week in the hospital, he never came once. The only news I got from him was when my attending doctor discussed my condition. David listened quietly, then coldly replied, "As long as she's not dead," and didn't ask again. My heart felt like it was being pricked by thousands of fine needles, the pain gradually spreading through my limbs. I finally gave up, my trembling fingers signing the divorce agreement, and booked a flight to leave in half a month. 10 years of love and hate were too heavy, too painful, so I gave it all up. David, I release you, and I release myself. After deciding to divorce, I clearly knew I couldn't and wouldn't fight for Stockton's custody. After all, I temporarily lacked the ability to provide him with educational resources comparable to the Williams family. For this, I specifically set aside half a month, hoping to spend more time with him. Stockton's first wish was to visit Monkey Mountain Zoo again. Tickets there were only $2, and the facilities were rudimentary. When David and I were broke, we often took him there to play. This wish wasn't hard to fulfill, but I didn't expect to run into David and Addison there. Miss Scarlett, did you find out David and I were here and follow us deliberately? Addison's eyes held thinly veiled contempt as she scanned Stockton and me. And you even brought your child to compete for attention. How pathetic. She could speak so carelessly because she knew David would support her. In the past, I would have certainly engaged her in a war of words. But now that I had decided to leave, who David liked or who he brought to relive memories had nothing to do with me. I calmly lowered my eyes, ignoring David's implied warning and impatient gaze behind her, and led Stockton around them. But I underestimated Addison's malice. As I was feeding the monkeys, Addison grabbed a small monkey's paw and violently threw it off the fence. The mother monkey was enraged and immediately attacked us. I barely dodged its claws, and before I could steady myself, Addison shoved me hard from behind, sending me sprawling towards the fence. I quickly grabbed her wrist and pulled her in with me. Addison's sharp screams echoed in my ears. When we were rescued, both our necks and arms were covered in monkey scratches. David, Addison, like an aggrieved child, threw herself into David's arms, exposing the marks on her wrist from where I pulled her. I just said a few words to Miss Scarlett, and she retaliated by pulling me down too. I'm in so much pain. David held her, gently patting and coaxing her. The tenderness and warmth in his eyes, when they landed on me, turned into suppressed anger and disappointment. Scarlett, apologize. He just believed her. Without even needing to hear my explanation, he was convinced I was to blame. A prolonged, stinging pain rose in my heart, making my fingertips tremble. I won't apologize. I suppressed the ache in my heart, raising my eyes to firmly confront David. She pushed me first. She got what she deserved. Truly the daughter of a murderer. Lying without batting an eyelid, David's eyes were so cold they seemed devoid of emotion. Addison is only 19. Though a bit childish, she's inherently pure-hearted, unlike your twisted, calculating mind. Those words were like a sharp knife, piercing deep into my heart. Indeed, those who once loved each other know best where to stab to inflict the most pain. It was David who, when I was shamed about my background, once cupped my face and earnestly told me, "Scarlett is the best Scarlett. You're not just someone's daughter. I know better than anyone what kind of person you are." Now it was him, in front of our child, returning that very humiliation to me. Humiliation and stinging pain collided in my chest. I finally couldn't bear it anymore, my eyes red as I questioned him aloud. "Do you have any shame saying that, David? She's 19, so she can't harm anyone. But I was only 17 when I was with you. Was I born evil?" "I have no shame? You were 17 when you got with me, so you had a lot of shame, did you? If you had any shame, would you have thrown yourself at me?" David spoke slowly, every word punctuated, the contempt in his eyes tearing away my last shred of dignity. In that instant, it felt like 1,000 arrows pierced my heart. Those words hurt too much. So much that I could barely stand, my face instantly turning deathly pale, my mind completely blank. What David said was true. When I was 17, I escaped that hellish home with him, avoided the fate of being married off by my mother for money, and successfully got into college. Because I felt so insecure, I proactively tried to hold on to him by giving myself to him. Back then, David didn't touch me. He held me all night, his tears burning my heart, making it ache. He told me again and again that I didn't need to do that he would cherish me and be good to me for life. Now, to protect another woman, he actually used that incident to mock me. I never apologized to Addison. Stockton stood up for me, recounting the entire incident, but David dismissed it as a lie Stockton told to defend me. "Look at the wonderful son you've raised." David pointed at Stockton, angrily questioning me. "So young, yet he lies without batting an eyelid. Are you trying to turn him into a murderer too?" Addison's cries continued without end, tugging at David's sleeve and repeatedly complaining of pain. To appease her, David had me locked in the enclosure. The mother monkey, still furious, pounced on me. Its sharp claws tore fiercely across my arm, which I used to shield my face, leaving numerous bloody marks. The excruciating pain made me clench my jaw, suppressing a scream that caught in my throat, but my spine trembled involuntarily. It hurt so much. Stockton was still a child. Seeing my frantic, desperate attempts to escape, he burst into tears, struggling to get me out, but David's men forcibly held him back. Stockton, look closely. This is the consequence of harming others and lying. Don't be as vile as your mother. David finished coldly, then, taking Addison's hand, who was smugly sticking her tongue out at me, he turned and left. I was locked in the enclosure for an entire night. The next morning, when the staff let me out, my arms were practically shredded, and my face bore several shallow and deep claw marks. Stockton had already been taken away by David. I was in extreme pain, my whole body trembling as I treated my wounds. Dragging my body, which was numb with exhaustion, I stumbled home. It'll be okay. It'll pass soon. I bit down hard on my lower lip, reassuring myself repeatedly. Soon I can leave, just a little longer. Because I had misguided Stockton, David sent him to the old mansion. It wasn't until a week later that I received news from him. Stockton's second wish was to eat a savory meat pie, the kind I often made for him and his father when we were struggling. When I took the meat pie to the old mansion, the servant stopped me. They awkwardly explained that Addison, as Stockton's tutor, was giving him extra lessons, and I shouldn't disturb them. Helpless, I could only ask them to deliver the meat pie on my behalf. But to my shock, that afternoon, I received news that Stockton was hospitalized due to an allergic reaction to the meat pie. Stockton was allergic to seafood, but there was no seafood in my meat pie. What went wrong? I was in a panic. When I arrived at the hospital, Stockton had just been stabilized. His little face was pale and bluish, and my heart clenched with pain, bringing tears to my eyes. MS. Scarlett, your acting is superb. It's a shame you didn't become an actress. Addison pushed open the door, saw me, and immediately launched into an aggressive accusation. Just because David ignored you and wouldn't let you see Stockton, you put seafood in his meat pie to make him allergic? That's such a vile trick, isn't it? Filled with irritation and worry, I had no intention of arguing with her, only muttering a low, "Watch your mouth." Regardless of the fact that I had already given up on David and was about to leave, even if I were still clinging to my position as Mrs. David, I would never harm my own child. Is Addison wrong? David followed Addison in, his voice low and full of anger, yanking me forcefully out of the ward. Today at the old mansion, Stockton only ate the meat pie you sent. What more do you have to explain? Using our child for attention, Scarlett. You don't deserve to be a mother. You don't even deserve to be human. My wrist was red from his grip, and the unhealed wounds tore open, making my fingers tremble uncontrollably. Yet this pain was less than a tenth of what I felt inside. He actually believed I fed Stockton seafood just to put on a show. In his heart, I was really that despicable. Indignation and worry filled my heart. My eyes stung with anger as I gritted my teeth and said, "I told you it wasn't me. Stockton is my child. How could I possibly?" David didn't listen to my explanation. His angry eyes darkened, and he had his bodyguards push me downstairs, forbidding me from visiting. After multiple unsuccessful attempts, I had to sit by the fountain downstairs, hoping to find a chance to go up and see Stockton. However, I didn't get my chance. Instead, Addison showed up, wearing a smug look. "Feeling down, Scarlett? David just doesn't believe you." Addison leaned closer, her eyes openly provocative. "You, and that worthless child of yours, you don't mean much to David, do you?" In an instant it clicked. It was her. I suppressed an almost overwhelming rage and asked, "Was it you? Did you put seafood in the meat pie?" "It was me, so what?" Before Addison could finish, I slapped her hard across the face. My palm was numb and trembling, but I didn't feel it, only staring intently at Addison, wanting to tear her apart. I could tolerate her usual targeting of me. I had decided to leave, and I would tolerate what I could, refusing to get entangled with her. But Stockton was my bottom line. Addison didn't expect me to strike. She froze for a full 2 seconds, clutching her face, her beautiful features contorting into a snarl. She raised her hand to strike back, but when she caught sight of someone behind me, her movement abruptly stopped. "David," she changed her expression in a second, putting on a tearful, on the verge of crying look, and threw herself into David's arms. I saw Ms. Scarlett lingering downstairs, so I thought she was worried about Stockton and came to persuade her, but then she suddenly hit me. A vicious woman like her, who would even harm her own child to compete for attention. How could she truly care about Stockton? She just wants an opportunity to put on a show of maternal love. David hugged Addison, comforting her. His gaze, usually cold, turned icy as he looked at me. "Slap her back. This time, I won't hold it against you." He trusted her that much. Time and again, without even asking, he powerfully stood up for her. The words, "put on a show of maternal love," echoed in my mind. My heart felt like it was being torn by a blunt knife, making my fingertips recoil. "David, why don't you ask me why I hit her?" I spoke slowly, every word deliberate and serious. "Your mistress just confessed herself that she swapped the meat pie I made for Stockton and added seafood to it. Scarlett, your lying skills are truly as despicable as your character." David scoffed coldly. Although Addison is innocent and a bit mischievous, she always knows her boundaries and treats Stockton like her own child. How could she do such a thing? He stopped listening to my explanation and had his bodyguards restrain me. At David's instruction, the bodyguards swung their arms, slapping me repeatedly across the face. My cheeks burned, quickly swelling, my mind went blank, and my ears rang incessantly. "You're reluctant to do it yourself, so I have to get others to do it," David said, walking up to me after the 10th slap. He looked down at me. "This is a warning to you. I will return what you did to Addison tenfold. Don't let me see you next time." Pain spread from my cheeks, but more than that, it was humiliation and disgrace. I collapsed onto the ground, utterly exhausted, watching David's retreating back and Addison's secretly smug eyes. My chest felt like it was stuffed with expanding cotton, and my eyes stung with tears. "Don't rush. I can leave in just one more week. Once I'm away from these rotten people and rotten situations, I can live my own life." Stockton woke up that evening. Seeming to know I would be leaving soon, he insisted on being discharged against the doctor's advice and presented me with his third wish. He wanted to go to the amusement park I designed with me. This amusement park was the first major project I was responsible for after joining the Williams Group, and it was a sore spot for me. I poured my heart and soul into this project, drawing blueprints day and night, but the final credit was given to Addison, who just used it to pad her resume. So, after the amusement park was built, I never visited it once. But with my departure imminent, I naturally wouldn't refuse Stockton. I spent the afternoon with Stockton at the amusement park, taking many photos of him and even showing him the hidden features of various rides. He was, after all, a 7-year-old child. His cool demeanor quickly melted away, his eyes bright and smiling. It wasn't until night had completely fallen and Stockton was tired from playing that he sat down to rest in a small pavilion. I bought him an ice cream, which was usually strictly regulated. Just as I was about to tell him it was time to go home, the pavilion's beam suddenly snapped, and it instantly collapsed. Stockton. My pupils constricted, and my heart seemed to stop along with time. The sound of splintering timber was like a sudden crack of thunder in the quiet evening. Time, which had been dragging so heavily through the long weeks of my misery, seemed to contract into a single, agonizing millisecond. The heavy oak beam of the pavilion, weakened by a structural failure I did not yet understand, groaned under its own weight and sheared clean off its support pillar. It was falling directly toward the bench where Stockton sat, his eyes wide with a child's sudden, paralyzing terror. I didn't think. I didn't feel the dull, throbbing pain in my swollen cheeks from the slaps David's bodyguards had delivered hours earlier. I didn't feel the sting of the fresh monkey scratches lining my arms. There was only the visceral, primal instinct of a mother. I lunged forward, throwing my body over Stockton, wrapping my arms around his head and pressing him flat against the stone floor of the pavilion. Boom! The impact was deafening. The main beam struck my back with a sickening, heavy thud. The sheer force of the blow knocked the breath entirely from my lungs, sending a white-hot spark of agony down my spine. Plaster, dust, and heavy wooden shingles rained down around us, burying us in a suffocating cloud of gray debris. For a few seconds, there was only the sound of my own ragged, whistling breath, and the ringing in my ears. I couldn't move. My lower half felt entirely numb, while my upper back burned as if it had been pressed against a searing iron. "Great. Mom? Mom." Stockton's voice was muffled beneath me, trembling with a terror I had never heard from him before. His small hands clawed at my chest, trying to push me up, but my body was a useless, heavy weight. I'm here, baby," I croaked out. The taste of plaster dust and copper filled my mouth. Are you hurt?"
"I'm okay, Mom. I'm okay."
"Please get up, please." He began to sob, the carefully constructed mask of a mature 7-year-old completely shattering. He was just a little boy, clinging to his bleeding mother in the ruins of a collapsed playground. I tried to push myself up, but a sharp, stabbing pain in my collarbone forced a scream past my lips. I collapsed back down, shielding him as best as I could, with the remaining strength in my arms. Through the dust, I heard shouts in the distance. Over here, the pavilion collapsed. Call an ambulance.
Quick.
The chaotic rush of footsteps approached. Several pairs of strong hands began, pulling the heavy beams and debris off my back. Every movement sent a new wave of agony through my body. When the weight was finally lifted, the cool night air hit my sweat-drenched, bloodied skin. Scarlet. The voice was sharp, cutting through the din of the gathering crowd.
It was
David. I blinked through the dust and blood dripping from a cut on my forehead. Through the haze, I saw him running toward us, his face pale, his expensive suit jacket discarded. Behind him, running in high heels and looking thoroughly inconvenienced, was Addison. They had been at the amusement park tonight too. Of course they had. Today was the official VIP preview night for the park's new expansion, the very project I had designed and the very project Addison had taken the credit for. David slid to his knees in the dirt beside us, his hands hovering over me, trembling. Scarlet, what happened? How did this?
Dad.
Stockton screamed, his face streaked with tears and gray dust. He didn't reach out for his father. Instead, he placed his small body between David and me, his eyes blazing with an anger that should never belong to a 7-year-old. Don't touch her. Don't you touch her. David flinched, his hand dropping. Stockton, I'm your father. I'm trying to help. You took her to the monkeys. You let them hit her. You locked her up. Stockton's voice cracked, raw and hysterical. Now she's bleeding because of your stupid park. It's all your fault. Go away. Take your bad lady and go away. Addison stepped back, her face twisting into a look of delicate horror. David, the child is hysterical, and look at the pavilion. How could a brand new structure just collapse like this? This is Scarlett's design, isn't it? Did she do this on purpose to hurt us? Even now, even with me lying in a pool of my own blood, my bones shattered, my child screaming in terror, she was still trying to twist it. I closed my eyes. I didn't have the breath to argue. I didn't have the heart to
care.
Shut up, David said. It wasn't directed at me. It was directed at Addison. His voice was unusually quiet, hollow, and laced with a sudden, icy realization. He looked at the shattered support beam, then at my mangled, dust-covered body, and finally at Stockton, who was shaking violently as he held my hand. David. Addison's voice went high and tight. I was just saying. I said, shut up, Addison. David repeated, louder this time, his eyes never leaving my face. He reached out to lift me, but I flinched away, a low groan escaping my lips. Don't, I whispered, my voice barely audible. Don't touch me. The paramedics arrived then, pushing David aside with clinical efficiency. They secured my neck, slid a backboard beneath me, and lifted me away from the ruins of the pavilion. As they wheeled me toward the flashing red lights of the ambulance, Stockton held onto the side of the gurney, refusing to let go. David tried to follow, but Stockton turned his head and spat on the ground near David's shoes. If Mom dies, the boy whispered, his voice deadly cold, I will never speak to you again for the rest of my life. David stood frozen in the headlights of the emergency vehicles, his face cast in shock, terrible shadows. Beside him, Addison reached out to touch his arm, but for the first time in months, David violently shrugged her hand off. The hospital smelled of bleach and sterile quiet. I had suffered a fractured collarbone, 3 broken ribs, a severe concussion, and deep lacerations across my back and arms where the rough timber had dragged against my skin. The doctor said it was a miracle my spine hadn't been severed. Your body took the brunt of the impact, the doctor had told me, his voice gentle. If you hadn't shielded the boy, he wouldn't have survived. I lay in the private ward, the soft hum of the heart monitor the only sound breaking the silence. Stockton was asleep on the small cot beside my bed. He had refused to leave my side, refusing even the food the nurses brought until I woke up and took a sip of water myself. The door clicked open. I didn't turn my head, but I knew the heavy, hesitant step. It was David. He walked into the room slowly, looking entirely different from the arrogant, cold man who had stood by and watched his bodyguard slap me a week ago. His eyes were bloodshot, his jaw covered in a thick stubble, and his shirt wrinkled. He looked like the man who used to haul cement until his shoulders bled just to buy me a cheap birthday cake. He stopped at the foot of my bed. He looked at the heavy bandages wrapping my collarbone and arms, and a visible shudder ran through him. Scarlet, he breathed, his voice cracking. I looked out the window. The city lights were twinkling in the distance.
In
Exactly 5 days, my flight was scheduled to leave. I had already signed the papers. My passport was in my purse. Get out, I said quietly. Scarlett, please. Just let me speak, he pleaded, taking a step closer.
the
Police, they're investigating the collapse. I didn't know. I swear to you, I didn't know the materials used for the pavilion were substandard. I let out a soft, dry laugh that hurt my broken ribs. Your signature project, David. The one you took from me to hand to Addison. The one she put her name on. To show the world how talented she is. And you're telling me you didn't know? It was Addison's uncle's contracting company, David said, his voice trembling, with a mixture of rage and shame. She recommended them. She said they could complete the construction faster and cheaper to meet the launch deadline.
I
Trusted her. I didn't look at the revised blueprints. You never look, I said, turning my eyes to meet his. They were flat, empty, devoid of the anger that used to consume me. When Stockton drafted the divorce papers, you didn't look. When Addison told you I put seafood in the pie, you didn't look. When she told you I pushed her into the monkeys, you didn't look. Why start looking now, David? He looked as if I had struck him. He took another step forward, his hands reaching out instinctively, but he stopped himself, remembering how I had flinched at the park. I was wrong, he whispered, tears finally spilling over his eyelids. I was so blind, Scarlett. When I saw you under that beam, when I saw the blood, it was like my whole world collapsed. I remembered. I remembered everything. The small rental apartment, the cold winters, the way you used to warm my hands in your
pockets.
How did we get here? How did I become this monster? You became a monster because you forgot where you came from, David. I said, my voice steady, though my heart felt like it was breaking all over again. Not from love, but from the sheer, exhausting waste of those 10 years. And you forgot who built you. You thought you did it all yourself. You thought my struggles, my background, my scarred life were embarrassment to your grand new world. So you found someone young, someone clean, someone who didn't remind you of the days you had to beg for scraps. No, that's not true. It is true, I interrupted. But it doesn't matter anymore. The divorce papers
Are signed.
You signed them. Stockton's lawyer friend drafted them perfectly. Didn't he? David's face went pale. Scarlett, about the divorce papers. I didn't read them. My legal team just reviewed the copy that was filed. Do you know what was in them? I frowned slightly, turning my head to look at him. What do you mean? The terms, David whispered, his voice trembling. Because I signed them, without looking, and because they were processed immediately under the emergency fast-track clause my own company uses. Stockton's lawyer didn't just write a standard agreement. He transferred 60% of my personal shares in the Williams Group to you, along with the sole custody of Stockton and the entire ownership of the amusement park patent. I stared at him, stunned. I looked over at Stockton, who was still fast asleep, his thumb tucked slightly near his mouth. A 7-year-old child. How could he have arranged this? Then I remembered. Stockton's godfather was Julian Vance, the premier corporate litigator in the country, and my closest friend from college. David had always hated Julian, accusing me of having an affair with him whenever we argued. Stockton must have gone to Julian directly. Julian, I muttered. Yes, Vance, David said, his voice bitter but defeated. He drafted it.
He used
my own negligence against me. Right now, on paper, you own more of the Williams Group than my mother and I combined. You have sole custody of our son.
I have
Nothing but the empty shell of my position. He fell to his knees beside the bed, burying his face in the sterile white
sheets.
But I don't care about the shares, Scarlett.
I don't care about the
money. Just don't leave. Don't take Stockton and leave me. I'll make it up to
you.
I'll throw Addison out. I'll put her in jail for what she did to the construction files. Just give me one more chance. I looked down at his dark hair, at the shoulders that still bore the faint, pale scars of the construction site injuries he had suffered for me when we were 17. A long time ago, those scars were the proof of his love. Now, they were just a monument to a dead man. The David who worked at the construction site died a long time ago, David. I said softly, my voice filled with a final, absolute peace. You killed him.
And
I'm not going to spend the rest of my life mourning a ghost. Get out of my room. He sobbed, a harsh, ugly sound, but I didn't reach out to pat his head. I didn't offer him comfort. I just closed my eyes and waited for the silence to return. 3 days later, the hospital room was filled with the quiet rustle of paper. Julian Vance sat in the armchair opposite my bed, a thick leather briefcase open. On his lap. "You look terrible, Scarlett," Julian said, though his eyes were warm and filled with deep concern. "But your signatures are solid. The transfer of the shares is
Complete.
David's legal team tried to dispute the contract on the grounds of unintentional signing, but because he signed it in front of a registered notary, whom Stockton legally hired and brought to his office, the court threw out the appeal. I looked at Stockton, who was quietly drawing at the small table in the corner. "How did you do it, Stockton?" The boy looked up, his expression serious. "Dad always signs whatever Addison hands him. I knew if I put the papers inside the folder for her ankle treatment bills, he wouldn't look. He just wanted her to stop crying. He thinks money solves everything, so he signs the checks." Julian let out a soft, appreciative whistle. "The kid is a tactical genius."
Scarlett.
He came to my office with a USB drive containing 3 years of David's financial records that he copied from the home computer. He knew exactly which assets were personal and which were corporate. "I just wanted Mom to be safe," Stockton said quietly, returning to his drawing. "If we have the money, Dad can't use his lawyers to take me away from you.
And
We can go to the place where there are no monkeys and no Addison." My eyes filled with tears. I reached out with my uninjured arm and Stockton immediately ran over, burying his face in my side. I held him tight, feeling the steady beat of his heart. "Where are we going, Mom?" he whispered. "To the coast," I said, kissing the top of his head. "To a place where the air smells like salt and the houses are painted blue. We're going to start over." "What about David?" Julian asked, his tone turning serious. "The police have officially opened a criminal investigation into the pavilion's collapse.
the
Structural engineers found that the load-bearing beams were swapped with cheap, aesthetic composite materials that were never rated for outdoor weather.
the
Contracting company is owned by Addison's uncle, but the approval signature on the material swap order." Julian paused, pulling out a document. It wasn't David's. It was Addison's. She forged his digital signature to bypass the Quality Control Board, pocketing a kickback of nearly $2 million from her uncle's company. I wasn't surprised. Addison's greed was always as transparent as her innocence was fake. She wanted the lifestyle David promised her, but she wanted it immediately. She didn't want to wait for him to slowly siphon off his family's
wealth.
"Does David know?"
I asked.
"He knows," Julian said with a grim smile. "The police arrested her this morning at the Williams Group headquarters. She was trying to get into David's private
Safe.
Apparently, when David found out about the forgery, he locked her out of all his accounts. She tried to run, but they caught her in the lobby." I looked down at my bandaged hands. There was no joy in this news, no sense of triumphant revenge, only a profound, heavy exhaustion. "And David? He's desperate," Julian said. "His mother, Eleanor, is furious. The Williams family name is dragged through the mud. The stock price of the Williams Group has plummeted because of the safety scandal. Eleanor is demanding David step down as CEO, and since you now hold 60% of the shares, you have the final vote on who replaces him." I looked out the window. The sky was gray, heavy with impending rain. "Tell Eleanor she can have the company back," I said. Julian stared at me, his eyes wide. "Scarlett, are you crazy? That's billions of
dollars.
You have them by the throat." "I don't want their money, Julian. I don't want their company, and I don't want their drama," I said, my voice firm. "But I won't give it back for free.
Tell
Eleanor I will trade the 60% shares back to the Williams family under 2 conditions." "What conditions?" "First, they must pay out a lump sum of $10 million into a trust fund for Stockton, which he can access only when he turns 21. Until then, neither David nor Eleanor can touch a single penny of it. And the second, David must sign a legally binding, irrevocable termination of parental rights. He will have no visitation, no communication, and no legal association with
Stockton.
My son will take my surname. We will disappear, and the Williams family will never attempt to find us." Julian looked at me for a long, silent moment. Then a slow, respectful smile spread across his face. "You're cutting the anchor," he said softly. "Yes," I said, looking at Stockton, who was looking up at me with bright, hopeful eyes. "I'm cutting the anchor. It's time to breathe." The day before my departure, the hospital finally discharged me. My body was still sore, my ribs bound tightly under my coat, but I could walk. The air outside was crisp and clean, a sharp contrast to the suffocating warmth of the hospital. Julian had arranged a private car to take us to the airport the next morning. But that afternoon, I had one final task. I went back to the old rental apartment, the one David and I had kept even after we became wealthy, the place where we had promised to never forget our roots.
I
Needed to retrieve a small wooden box from the floorboards under the bed.
It
Contained my grandmother's ring and the hand-drawn blueprints of the first house David and I had dreamed of building. As I unlocked the door, the hinges groaned. The apartment was dusty, smelling of old paper and neglect. I walked into the small bedroom, knelt down with difficulty, and pulled up the loose floorboard. The wooden box was still there, covered in a thin layer of
dust.
I clutched it to my chest, a quiet sigh escaping my lips. Scarlet. I stiffened. I hadn't heard the front door open. I turned around slowly, holding onto the bedpost for support. David stood in the doorway. He looked worse than he had at the hospital. His eyes were sunken, dark circles bruising the skin beneath them. He was wearing an old, faded flannel shirt, the one he used to wear when he worked at the construction site. "What are you doing here, David?" I asked, keeping my voice level. "I knew you'd come here," he said, his voice barely a whisper. He looked around the small, cramped room, his eyes filled with a desperate, agonizing nostalgia. "Do you remember this room? We couldn't afford a heater. We used to pile 3 blankets on top of us, and I'd hold you all night so you wouldn't shiver." "I remember," I said. "But memories don't keep people warm forever, David. Eventually, the fire goes out." He took a step into the room, his hands trembling. "I signed the papers, Scarlet. My mother agreed to the terms. The 10 million is in Stockton's trust.
And
I signed away my rights." He choked on the words, a tear escaping and running down his haggard cheek.
I
"Gave up my son. I had to. My mother threatened to ruin me completely if I didn't save the company. But more than that, I realized I don't deserve to be his father. Not after what I did. Not after what I let happen to you." "You made your choice a long time ago, David," I said, stepping past him toward the living room. "You chose Addison. You chose the easy, superficial adoration of a girl who only loved your wallet." "She's in jail," David said, his voice suddenly sharp with disgust. "They're charging her with grand larceny, corporate espionage, and forgery. She's going away for a long time. Her uncle's company is bankrupt. When the police handcuffed her, she was screaming my name, begging me to save her." He looked at me, his eyes begging for a crumb of sympathy. I didn't even look at her. I walked away, just like you did. "Don't compare me to you," I said, stopping at the front door. "I walked away too. Save my life and my child. You walked away because your toy broke and started costing you money." David grabbed my wrist, not forcefully, but with a desperate, clinging grip. "Scarlet, please. Just tell me where you're going. Let me just know you're safe. I don't ask for visitation. Just let me send you letters. Let me know my son is growing up." I looked down at his hand on my wrist. This was the hand that had once held mine so fiercely against his mother's anger. This was the hand that had carried heavy cement bags until his bones ached. And this was the hand that had ordered his bodyguards to slap me in front of a mocking crowd. "No, David," I said, my voice cold and absolute. "You don't get to have a window into the life you destroyed. When I walk out of this door, you are dead to us. If you try to find us, Julian will release the remaining financial audits to the Federal Tax Board. You know what that means for the Williams Group." His hand slowly slipped from my wrist. The realization that he had truly, utterly lost everything washed over his face, leaving him looking hollow, like a wax figure melting in the sun. "You hate me that much?" he whispered. "I don't hate you, David," I said, opening the door. "Hate requires feeling. Right now, when I look at you, I feel nothing at all." I walked out, closing the door behind me. The click of the lock was the loudest sound I had ever heard. The next morning, the rain had cleared, leaving the sky a brilliant, pale blue. Julian drove us to the airport. Stockton sat in the back seat, holding a small, toy airplane, his eyes glued to the window. For the first time in years, the tension in his small shoulders was gone. He looked like a normal 7-year-old boy, excited for an adventure. At the boarding gate, Julian handed me a thick envelope. "Your new identity papers, medical records, and the deed to the house in Carmel by the Sea," Julian said, giving me a warm, reassuring hub. The house is right on the cliff. You can see the ocean from the kitchen window. I've already hired a local school for Stockton. He starts next month. Thank you, Julian, I said, my voice thick with emotion. I don't know how I would have survived this without you. You would have survived, Julian said gently, pulling back to look at me. You're Scarlet. You've survived worse than David Williams. Now go. Your flight is boarding. I took Stockton's hand. We walked through the gate, leaving the noise, the pain, and the bitter memories of the city behind us. As the plane lifted off the runway, tilting up into the endless blue sky, I looked out the window. The city below shrunk into a tiny, insignificant grid of concrete and gray stone. Beside me, Stockton rested his head against my shoulder. Mom, he whispered. Yes, sweetie. Are we safe now? I looked down at his beautiful, clear eyes, free of the shadow of his father's neglect. I felt the steady, healing beat of my own heart, the physical pain in my body fading with every mile we put between ourselves and the past. Yes, Stockton, I said, kissing his forehead. We are finally safe. 6 months later, the winter in the city was exceptionally harsh. A cold, gray sleet fell over the grand headquarters of the Williams Group. Inside the CEO's office, the air was freezing. The heating had been turned down to save on utility costs. The once bustling corporate offices were mostly empty. Half of the floors closed off after the massive restructuring and the loss of 70% of their high-profile clients following the amusement park
Disaster.
David sat at his grand mahogany desk, staring at a single piece of paper. It was a court report. Addison's trial had concluded. She had been sentenced to 8 years in a federal penitentiary for corporate fraud and endangerment. Her family's assets had been seized to pay restitution to the victims of the pavilion collapse. But David felt no satisfaction. His mother, Eleanor, had taken full control of the remaining board seats, leaving David as a figurehead CEO with no real power, no respect, and a salary that barely covered the interest on his personal debts. His phone buzzed. It was a private investigator he had hired secretly 6 months ago. David snatched the phone up, his heart pounding with a sudden, desperate hope. Did you find them? The voice on the other end was dry and professional. Mr. Williams, I'm calling
To terminate our contract.
As I told you before, the Vance law firm has set up a triple-layered legal firewall around your ex-wife's assets. Any attempt to trace her location triggers an automatic alert to the IRS regarding your family's offshore holdings. My agency cannot risk that level of exposure. I suggest you stop looking. The line went dead. David slowly lowered the phone. The silence of the massive, empty office pressed in on him. He looked at his desk, where a framed photo used to stand, a photo of a 17-year-old girl, with dirt on her cheek, smiling brightly as she held a single red rose he had bought with his last $5. He had thrown that photo in the trash the day Addison moved into the mansion. Now he had nothing. He stood up, walking to the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the gray, unforgiving city. His left shoulder flared with a sudden, sharp pain, the old injury from the construction site, aching in the winter cold. He clutched his shoulder, tears finally spilling over his cold, empty eyes. He had built an empire for the woman he loved, only to let his own arrogance destroy the very foundation of his life. He was left in his grand, empty castle, warm in his wealth, but freezing in his soul. On the coast of Carmel by the sea, the air smelled of salt and wild pine. The small, 2-story house sat on a grassy cliff, its blue wooden shutters flapping gently in the sea breeze. Down below, the white sand beach stretched out, the blue waves crashing softly against the rocks. I sat on the wooden deck, a warm cup of tea between my hands. My face had healed. The claw marks from the monkeys were now nothing more than faint, silver lines near my temple, scars of a battle I had survived, rather than marks of shame. My arm was fully functional again, and the deep, heavy pain in my chest had been replaced by a quiet, steady peace. Inside the house, the sound of laughter echoed. Stockton was running around the living room with our new golden retriever puppy, his laughter bright and untroubled. He had grown taller, his cheeks rosy from the sea air, his eyes sparkling with the innocent joy of a child who knew he was loved and safe.
Mom.
Look. Stockton ran out onto the deck, pointing to the ocean. A whale.
I
Saw a whale. I looked out toward the horizon, where a dark, majestic shape broke the surface of the blue water, sending a tall plume of white spray into the air before sliding gracefully back beneath the waves. "It's beautiful, Stockton," I said, wrapping my arm around his shoulders. He leaned against me, his head resting against my side. "I like it here, Mom. The wind is sweet." "Yes, baby," I whispered, breathing in the cool, clean air. "The wind is very
Sweet.
I looked out at the endless horizon. The past was gone, buried under the weight of the sea. There was no more anger, no more tears, and no more bitter strangers. Only the ocean, the sky, and the beautiful, quiet life we had built from the ruins.